So you were asking how I was hanging my hammerheads. I have two considerations really. I always start from a reference line and then I shape it from there. And so what I mean my reference line is I'll take a pair of calipers and I'll measure the width of the eye as well as the thickness. And then I use these dividers just because I don't have to measure it. I don't have to make a template, I'm just making one so I can keep the shape. What I'll do now is I'll mark the center line right here using the dividers. In addition to scribing these lines, you want to mark where it is that you're going to stop the cut. Quick word of advice, when you go to cut the eye, the reference lines, always do that first when you have a square blank, because once you cut out the contours of the handle, it'll make it a lot harder. Alright, now that we have the handle blank, I typically run this through the router with the chamfer bit. You can also just do that using this compass, scribe out some lines, and then use a spoke shaver rasp. Now this entire length is same thickness. I like to put a little bit thinner or remove material right here as well as right here where the valleys are, so to speak. And you also can begin to tell if there are any inconsistencies in your handle. There's a little bit of a hinge right over here that I'll smooth out, or take material from this other side. Now these gotta be really careful. You want the hammer to slide on and compress and not split those out. And I cut a little bit too far, as you can see right there, so especially gotta be careful. Now it's all nice and smooth and chamfered all around all the edges. That's how you want it, so it doesn't split. After you take off the material layer to make it thinner in cross section, leave the chamfer as is. You want to try and match the chamfer size over here, but later on. This is how you know how far to go on the other side. Feels pretty good. So the next step is going to be when we're fitting the hammer onto the handle, you want this to be radiused so you do not split the end of your handle. I'm going to use a rasp. So in order to do this properly, you should remember which side of your hammer goes up, and also in which orientation to the handle. If it should go like that, or if it should go like that. Always make it go the same way every single time you try to shape the hammer eye on the handle piece. So I'm just remembering this big divot is on the top. And I'll put a little X on the wood right here to signify the big part of the hammer. Draw knife is actually really handy here because spoke shave limits how deep you can go, and you need to start fairly deep over here. So once again, just sighting down the hammer, you can see where it is you need to take off the material and go from there. So say your hammer is canted this way, your handle's canted that way, you can remove material from this side, and it should twist itself back into alignment, provided you have enough material. So now you can just go ahead and send it all the way. At this point, you'd also cut an area for your wedge. Wedge wood choice, you want to use some sort of soft wood. Doesn't have to be soft wood necessarily. You just want it to be able to compress a lot more than your handle material. This is Oregon ash, so it's still fairly soft, but you want to use like pine or something. Alrighty, to finish hanging the hammer on handle, you need your wedge and a couple choice hammers or mallets, whatever you want to use. I prefer to cut the kerf really large, so that way I can just jam it on there once and not have to take the handle back off, because that kind of ruins the end of it and you might split it. So yeah, I don't have any glue on hand. I've done plenty of hammers without glue to hold the wedge in. So it's looking pretty good. Might whack it. Heard that last whack, how the tone changed? This thing is not going anywhere. Open up the kerf again with the chisel. Stick the wedge in. Start slow. So now I've driven on the wedge pretty much as far as it'll go with the hammer. You can try and make a little frame or something that is metal and use a little bottle jack or another, whatever kind of jack you have, hydraulic, and press it in. Alright, so the last thing I like to do is I get a wedge, and don't put it completely parallel with the wedge, or perpendicular. Diagonal is best, so that way it expands both the thickness and the width of the hammer eye. Now that's pretty much it. After that, you can pretty much just finish sanding the handle and go to town on oil, whatever you want to do. Just to kind of paraphrase this long video, you're going to need those two reference lines for the width and the thickness of your eye. When you have that square eye, I guess is what you'd call it, you know that your hammer is not going to be too small or it's too big, so you don't have to worry about those dimensions. It's all going to be a matter of taking off the corners, and yeah, it just makes it a lot easier. Second consideration that I tried to emphasize was using a softer wedge than your handle material, so that way your wedge is constantly under tension, or compression I should say, and despite any humidity or temperature changes, it'll always be compressed and pushing out on the eye, therefore keeping the hammerhead tight on the handle, and then third is using a little metal wedge diagonally so that it'll expand both in thickness and in width of your eye. That is going to be the other component that helps make sure this will never get loose. And if you know anything about how a hammer eye looks or how it should look, it's like a what do you call it? Timer or wine glass, where it goes wide, thin, and then wide again. And so when you have the top of your eye expanded, that's filling up the top portion where it's wide. And in the center of the hammer, it's going to be thin. And then at the base of your hammer, it's going to be wide again. So by chamfering the edges right around here, it'll ensure that the hammer eye is completely filled at the very base. And then whatever's in the center really doesn't matter all that much. It's just holding together those two clamping forces that are pulling together, holding the hammer on there. So, hope you found this useful. Hope it answered your question. Just send me a text if you have any more questions. Thanks.